walking in. This is the rise of user experience as a ranking factor with Eric Enge. So,
Tony, how are you?
okay, everyone, thanks for coming in after lunch. We've got an amazing session for you today. This is Eric Enge, who is a longtime friend of mine, friend of DFW SEM, and webmaster SEO extraordinaire. So I'm going to let him introduce himself, and without further ado, here's Eric.
I don't need the mic. I got this one here. Thank you. All right, thank you. Yeah, just I'll add, I mean, I've been involved in SEO for over 20 years. I was lead author on the book, The Art of SEO from O'Reilly Media. Yeah, just been doing it, and hopefully have a few things I can share with you about user experience as a ranking factor. I am going to cover like the obvious stuff, like the page experience signal, but there's other things that we need to think about in the user experience like EAT, and other aspects of how Google behaves. The Search Quality Raters Guide has a lot in it too. And it's important to understand that when we think about putting together our overall SEO strategy. So first, I apologize, it looks a little blurry up here, but this is actually a search session on health. And it starts with a query that says, nausea, headache, pregnant, what's wrong? And this is, by the way, this is data sourced from Bing, as I said over here. This is an actual search journey of someone where they went through a number of steps before they found what they were looking for. And part of it was they didn't know how to ask the right question to start with. This stuff is really, really common. In fact, this is more common than somebody enters a phrase, they come to your page and they convert. It's far more common. But this particular sequence lasted, 15 minutes cumulatively before they found out that they were interested in content on the first sign of gestational diabetes. Just another example. This one is a little bit of a different example because the first one was sort of about the user journey. The second one is about how frustrating it can be for a user to get what they want. So they start here with a query on Merrill shoes, right? So that's, relatively specific. And then they actually go to onlinestores.com, then they go to Merrill.com. They searched on Merrill shoes and they can't find what they want on Merrill.com. Something seems wrong with that picture, right? But in any case, they begin working down their way. They go, this is from a few years back. So they went to a site, NextTag, and a bunch of other sites. And they finally end up on easyspirit.com, and they buy shoes there. So they started with Merrill shoes, but they bought somebody else's product. So that is a bad customer experience right there. And the reality is, even though you might think the search engines love this because they get a lot of usage, it turns out that these kinds of experiences are frustrating for users, and it leads them to not being happy with how difficult it was to get to what they wanted. So with that in mind, next I want to talk a little bit about some of the messaging that Google has been giving us about how do we deal with them and how do we rank better and these kinds of things. And so here's a tweet from Danny Sullivan in 2019. It started with being about BERT, but he basically says, there isn't really anything that you can do about BERT, and which is true, by the way. But the fundamentals of us seeking to reward great content remain the same. Okay, Well, let's go a little further back, again from Danny. Want to do better with a broad change. Have great content. Okay, messaging is beginning to get consistent here. Then we go a little further back and get a tweet from Rishi Lakhani. I may be mispronouncing his name. And then Gary Ish responds because this tweet is about an affiliate site guy. It turns out to be At the Points guy, criticizing the site. And Gary comes back and says, but look at what he's doing. They're creating great content, and they do have sponsored links, but the focus of the content is on the user. Okay, so a theme is emerging here. And then just another one for good measure. What do you do if a site has a boatload of thin content, like a forum with thousands of blank pages? And he basically says, you really need content with created with great care for users. Blank pages we just ignore. Okay. Now, by the way, I would still advise you to get rid of those blank pages, but the message is still clear: is that they want you to focus on the pages that matter. So ultimately, though, this is what Google is looking for, or what the user is looking for from Google. It's always about give me what I want fast, right? Google isn't the place where you go to be entertained for hours on end. They want you to arrive there, find what you want, and go. That's always been, and by the way, that's true whether the answer is given to you by Google or not, right? A lot of times, maybe not as large a percentage as it used to be, but it still matters that you get what you want fast. So ultimately, this is the way I like to position Google. They're a get users what they want fast engine. That's essentially it. By the way, complete contrast from YouTube, where the point is to keep them there because they want to be entertained for a long period of time. So the result is, this is their user satisfaction chart. Over time, basically hovered around 80%, like nearly forever. It dropped a little bit in the past year, but it's still pretty damn high for something that's basically a utility, right? I mean, everybody uses it. It's a necessary part of everyday life, more or less. And the result is, of course, we all know this story too. They're dominant. It's because they do this very, very well, and they invest a lot of energy improving it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be a Google apologist here. I'm not saying they do everything perfectly, or they don't manipulate some things in one place or another, and that they're certainly out to make ad revenue. All of those things are also true, but they really have to do a good job of preserving that market share, because that's where all their ability to make their money comes from. So with that introduction, let's first, as I said, dive in by talking about the page experience signal and what that's about, as that's the more obvious piece of this. And here are the major components. You've got largest contentful paint and first input delay and cumulative layout shift, which are part of their core Web Vitals metric. And that's pretty straightforward as to why that is a user experience related factor. And the other signals, mobile friendly, whether a page is HTTPS secure, and the lack of intrusive interstitials, those are fairly obvious why all of those are user experience signals. So again, this is the obvious stuff, right? But in layman's terms, what they want is content that will load really fast over secure connections, can be easily read on mobile, and is not obscured by other things. So they want the user to get the content they want immediately above the fold on page load. That's it. It's like we allowed your listing to be in our search results. One of my users clicked on it. I want them to get what you advertised you would give them immediately, right? So that's that part of the message. But just to go into the core Web Vitals piece in a little more detail. User abandonment due to page load speed. These are two data points. They're both from different parts of Google. One saying that 53% of visits are abandoned if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. And the second of which says that the average web page takes 15 0.3 seconds to load. That's a frightening pair of statistics. Now, to be fair, that would sound like nobody ever would stay at your page ever, right? And it isn't really quite that way, but the message is clear, right? I mean, users want what they want fast too, right? So one of the main components of this piece in terms of addressing page speed is largest contentful paint. And what that's about is getting that biggest block of content that's above the fold rendering quickly for the user. Because, they're on their mobile phone, they do their search, don't make me work for it, put it up there quickly. And the largest contentful paint is the specific metric that they use to measure that. And they want that score to be within 2.5 seconds. So that would be, I think it's more than, Tony, you might know the percentage. Some large percentage has to load within 2.5 seconds or less. So can be any of these kinds of elements, by the way, that could make up that largest content element above the fold. So next up is first input delay, which is basically a measure of when a user clicks on something, it takes the page some time to respond, usually because it's busy with something else, right? It might be processing some JavaScript or something along those lines. And therefore, it's a little bit sluggish in responding to the user click. And so what happens is the user ends up responding before even the first initial thing happens in response to their click. So that's another aspect that they've put a lot of emphasis on. And here, they want a rating of better than 1/10 of a second, which is a relatively tough metric to hit, actually. So that's that piece. And then next up is cumulative layout shift. So this is an interesting one because basically, let's say you do load your main content very quickly and the user decides they want to click on something right here. And at the moment they click on it, because the page is still rendering, stuff shifts and an ad pops up and they click on an ad. And that's an extreme example. Even if it's just like the thing they clicked on just went away and because there's something else and it doesn't, it's just a bad experience. Once it renders, it should stay wherever you rendered it. So there's really easy things to do in the way you code your web pages to address this kind of thing. And then for HTTPS, it's been around. I won't spend that much time on this one, but it's been around for a long time. But the reason why it matters is there's this thing called a man-in-the-middle attack. And an easy way to think about it is when you first try to go to a web page from your hotel room and you're not currently online, the hotel room inserts some content. You don't get the page you requested, right? Because they want you to sign up. That's not malicious specifically, but there are other situations where out on the open web, and there's like 4 or 5 different ways you can do it. Somebody at a particular router or web server in the web can hack their way in there, intercept the web page on its way to you, and change the content. All right. And that is something that, obviously isn't good. And by the way, the fact that we have HTTPS doesn't 100% solve this, but it makes it a lot harder to do. So that's why Google has pushed for that. And then the problem with interstitials, right? Get something blocking the content. So it's violating that principle that I talked about. And once I click the search result, get the thing to render for me that I want very fast, right? Where, right out of the box. So that's that piece. And then mobile friendliness actually has several components. Here I'm just highlighting one of them, which is, your buttons being tappable, like, thumb, right? Thumb, it's big. If it's a mouse size item on my phone, I won't be able to click it. And there's also text too small, for example, or the viewport wasn't set so that the content would dynamically render in the mobile phone space. These are all the kinds of things that can go wrong. So that's why that matters to them. But I mean, ultimately, what it gets back to is what I said before, but to summarize it in another way is, what good is it that you have the best content in the world on a given topic if the user gets frustrated before they get it, or how they get it, or they just give up because don't get it in a timely enough manner? So this is part of the user experience story. But now to take a little bit of a shift, I want to talk about something else that has been prominent in SEO conversations over the past few years. And that's this notion of entities and relationships. And this is just a very simplistic example. But imagine that everything in the circles is an entity. And each of these lines between circles describes a relationship. Okay. And you can see that, Elon Musk, inventor of the Tesla Model S, founded many companies. I haven't even listed them all here, by the way. But he's founded many companies. He's been a student in a couple of places, but he's also been a child of someone. He was born in South Africa, I believe. He has children. I'm not sure how many dozens at this point, but that's a whole nother. Yeah. Okay. So, but you get the idea. And if you were trying to build a search engine and you wanted to understand quality of information, something that would be incredibly valuable is to understand all the entities in a given market space, say, and the relationships between them all. Because if you're creating good content for users, you have to understand this space and make sure that you're being thorough. Remember that first two slides I showed of those user journeys, where they involved a dozen steps or so, right? And the fact that the Merrill shoes people couldn't even successfully sell Merrill shoes. In fact, they managed to get that lead turned into something that bought a competitive shoe. You've got to really do a good job of mapping these spaces. And Google is very concerned about that. And as I said, it enables them to get a better understanding of content quality. And in addition, it gives it the ability to better understand link quality and relevance to you. And the reason is because it can tell when the site that's linking to you is highly relevant versus tangentially relevant or not relevant at all. And it can do that in a much more refined way with this kind of information. So now I'm going to shift gears again and talk a little about EAT, the Search Quality Rater's Guide. First, let's talk a little bit about the Search Quality Rater's Guide. Basically, it's instructions to a whole staff of people who are called, you would have guessed it, Search Quality Raters. And this is the guide to instruct them, how to look for problems in the search results. And what those raters do is they manually review search results for various queries. They're given priorities of areas to focus on by Google, by the corporate. And they go through and use the instructions in this guide to evaluate the quality of search results. And I'm going to show you a few snippets in a minute. And they do this at scale, because we're talking about thousands of people being allocated to this, which, by the way, covers a tiny fraction of all search results, but still it's useful input to Google. Excuse me. This is not a direct ranking factor. It's not used that way, but it's used by Google to update their algorithms. So when a number of problems get flagged, they go try to look at common types of problems, and then they find ways to tweak some aspect of their algorithm to improve the results overall. Hopefully, by the way, without messing up millions of other search results in the process. Not a very easy task. But just to give you some idea, there are 14,000 raters, and you can see roughly where they're distributed across the globe, or at least some of them are distributed across the globe. And you can see the scale of this operation is pretty impressive. So this is Google's own summary of what the Search Quality Raters Guide is about. And they want people to evaluate, does the page achieve its purpose? And then, what's its purpose? Well, that's implied at the very least by the title tag of the page and the heading tag collectively. But they also want to see if the page is harmful, and then they want the user, the rater, to go through and assign a rating to the page. And I'm going to go into this in a little more depth in a moment. And then if they're going to give it a score of needs met, and we'll talk about various levels of this score in a moment, but this is things, basically they want to assess how useful the result is for a given search query. So if the page purpose, as implied to its title tag, matches up with a specific search query really well, then does the promise made by that title tag, match up in a way that will provide a really good experience for the user clicking through to it. So, they really do want the rater to determine the user intent too, which is sometimes quite complicated. For example, the first search result query, the woman that ended up finding out or querying about gestational diabetes, she started with a query that was actually, not directly related to what she found out she needed to dig into, right? So it was sort of early causal relationship to it. It was a very complicated journey. So figuring out user intent can be pretty complex. And I'll get into that in a little bit more in a moment. So here's the page directly from the Rater's Guide for the needs met rating guideline. And then for fully meets, this is something that, as they say, applies only to certain queries and results. But basically, almost all mobile users would be immediately and fully satisfied by the result. Again, go back to those first two queries I gave you, and not even close, right, with their needs fully met. So if you think about the implications of this, it might suggest that you need your content to be very thorough and in-depth and cover a lot of different scenarios in order to get a rating like this. Here, highly meets is helpful for many or most mobile users. Some might need more information, and then it goes all the way down the scale, to fails to meet, which basically sounds like the page is crap. So with that context, let's now take a little bit of a look at EAT, or expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So the reason why Google cares about these things is it really reflects on whether or not you have the expertise and the authority to provide good content to the user, okay, and whether you can be trusted. So just to give you an example of trust, imagine you bring someone to your site with a really good piece of content, and let's say you arguably have expertise and authority, but then you follow that up with crappy promotional messaging, or and poor ads all over it, or they click on the next thing and they get to a completely spammy piece of content because the rest of the site isn't there. So when somebody has poor motives, the fact that they're an expert or arguably authoritative gets soiled because they're not going to treat the user well. But then think about this, of how poor the motives are for the content creator. And so this is what Google said in a slide, actually, at SMX. The screenshot was actually captured by Jen Slegg at an SMX a few years back. But this is what they said about EAT. It's our ground truth to figure out what's a good quality result for our users. So that gives you, sounds pretty important, right? Sounds like it matters a great deal. And this is what they said in the Webmaster's blog about it, just to take that a little further. But they're about EAT and also raters. Raters are people who give us insight on our algorithms. If our algorithms seem to be providing good results, it's important that with raters have no control over how our pages rank, and rather we use them the way a restaurant might use feedback cards from diners, right? So kind of confirming what I said before. But here's how I break down these three categories, just to give you an idea on it. So for expertise, to me, when I think about expertise, it's like you need to have broad and deep content. You need it to be accurate, and you need it to be high quality, which it's probably high quality if all those three things up top are true. But again, I want to get back to getting the user their need without them having to go to any other sites potentially. And then authoritativeness. I kind of link that first back to expertise. You have to have the expertise to be authoritative, but you also have to have the recognition in the market, right? We don't get to declare ourselves an authority. The market does that for you. Other people have to make that statement, right? And one of the best ways, other ways too, by the way, reviews can matter, and citations can be factored into this kind of process, depending on your business. And then some of the simple signals of trustworthiness, like, if you're an advertising-driven site, how broadly and prominently do you disclose your advertising practices? So for example, an affiliate site, which affiliate sites can still do quite well if they handle their content the right way, but you would want to disclose that, by the way, some of these links, if you click on them, I might make money on them, and you want to actually be transparent about that and how aggressive the call to actions are, and advertising density, intrusiveness are all kind of signals of a breakdown in trust. And then this is actually to show some places where EAT is referenced in the Search Quality Raters Guide. So it's interesting, reputation is an important criteria when using high rating and informs the EAT of the page. Well, a page can meet the high rating, blah, 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 blah. It cannot be used for any website that has a convincing negative reputation. Okay, remember that doing the reasons behind a negative reputation, and not just reasons behind a negative rating and not just the rating itself. And again, this is how that reputation can be established, right? So that's one piece. Another piece is, this is their discussion of pages with a high level of expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So they need enough expertise to be authoritative and trustworthy. So you see the connection there. And they're also trying to help us understand that expertise is defined a lot of different ways. So they even highlight here, even gossip websites potentially could be something that's expert, depending on the nature of the topic, or humor websites, or any number of different sites can be considered expert. And it points out certain kinds of information is almost exclusively found in forums. So a lot of places could potentially be expert. But then it's like, link that back to the topic of the page, and what is the kind of expertise required to achieve that purpose well? So the context dramatically affects whether you're actually considered as an expert. So, high quality news articles and information on scientific topics, those are, potentially another standard, right? And in case of scientific topics, you would want scientific consensus on the topic. So here's an example, delivered result or a rating where a page was called Hi, and it was the homepage of a newspaper, and it had a satisfying amount of content, positive reputation. But I highlight it because, first of all, news on the homepage of a newspaper is often on topics that significantly impact society. And that's where you get into your money or your life stuff, which I'm not going to go into in any detail. But this is the homepage of a newspaper that has won several prestigious awards. So there's another signal that can relate to whether you're seen as authoritative or even trustworthy in this case, right? So, and then it has a positive reputation for its objective reporting. So, just backing up things, known facts, these kinds of things in a way is clearly part of what they're looking for here. So with this in mind, I want to switch to the next piece of this, do a time check on myself here. I'm doing all right. How do we truly satisfy a large percentage of users? Because at the end of the day, if we're going to create a great user experience, we don't want a large percentage of people to have to leave our site and to go to some other site to get what they're looking for. All right. So just 3 slides on technical SEO here. First of all, I love technical SEO, but at the end of the day, it's table stakes. All right. Basically, it's about getting the most you can out of the content that you have on your site, and enabling rapid discovery of changes to that content and new content. No way am I minimizing its importance. And by the way, most people still screw it up to some degree. It's just how big the degree is. Little, big, it's still out there. Huge amount of work that needs to be done here. But at the end of the day, you have to get this right. But you're going to be competing with everybody else who gets it right. And it's a theoretically really easy thing to do. I mean, not always easy to execute, but know what needs to be done to get this right. So, that's just that. We just need to understand this piece plays its role. It's an enabler, but we win or lose based on the quality of our content and how well we promote it and we get people to recognize it. That's the game. All right. You must do this, but the game is about what you do with your content and how you promote it. And, it reflects itself, by the way, in Google's ranking factors. So at the end of the day, relevance and quality, they have the most weight. You will never get a Tupperware page to rank for used cars. I don't care how many links you get to it. It's completely irrelevant, right? So just, understand that that's important. So if you don't have relevant content, you will never rank for the term. And you look at the Google updates, and there's been for the past 3+ years, 4 years, I guess, at this point, where clearly a big part of all of them has been in better understanding query intent, better understanding which websites fully meet that used fully meets, I should have said meets, right? But that user intent, like we saw in the Quality Raters Guide, and the next few questions that are going to follow from the user after that. All right. And this is a really important concept, right? And I've said it in several different ways. And then provide a superior customer experience. So just to call out another piece of that, if you look at the helpful content update, there were 3 key points that they made about this. Are you producing lots of content on topics in hopes that it might perform well in search? So the suggestion here is maybe not everything's relevant to your topic, okay? Are you using extensive automation to produce content on many topics? Sounds like automation might be bad. We can maybe talk about that later. And are you just summarizing what others have to say without adding much value, right? So these are things that they're concerned about. And here's a white paper that Google published that relates to this conversation as well, which is how people decide, similar to those first two slides I showed, and what it's like for them in search is there's a trigger that starts them to go off and do something. And then they get into this exploration, evaluation loop that goes on and on and on for a while. And then they come out and eventually they do something. So, and if you read the white paper in detail, you just search for Google messy middle, you'll find it. It actually goes into this conversation in a great deal of depth on how they address those complicated user journeys. And here's some data from Bloomreach, which actually provides some similar supporting information, which is that customers, 82% of their time in the B2C space is spent browsing and searching. 82%. Okay, so that complicated journey I showed at the beginning is the norm. In B2B, it's 76%. It's not much different, right? So this is the expectation you need to have on any of the pages of your site. So just thinking about it another way, if I wanted to look at user needs as a pyramid of needs, and somebody might start with a head term, and then that might go to chunky middle terms, and then long tail terms, and very long tail terms. Not every journey looks like that either, by the way, but it's kind of like a parallel to discovery, initial research, detailed research, and taking action. So here's an example. Imagine someone searched on the query Ford Focus. Well, the first question is, do they want a sedan, a hatchback, an electric, or any of the specific models? The next question is, if they want a used car, well, maybe they probably care about the year, how old it is, and the number of miles it has. And then, regardless whether they're buying new or used, they're not going to make any buying decision until they've worked out their sunroof, their heated seats, their lane detection, their rear view camera. And they get all these options and all this detail filled. And this is a really simplistic example from a retailer's perspective. But this applies to essentially all of our spaces, right? And this sort of aligns really well with this famed concept of the long tail of search. This is the most recent data I could find here from Ahrefs. But it turns out that 95% of keywords are actually what we could call long tail, where a long tail here is defined not necessarily as very long keywords, although a lot of them are, but low search volumes, okay? So the head terms we all cherish are, less than 5% of all keywords. And 35% of all the search volume is in those low volume keywords. 35%, right? That's a third of everything. Oh, and by the way, they convert higher. So it might be half of all your conversions is sitting out there in the long tail. So if you have a site that hasn't addressed the long tail, you're potentially leaving half of your market to your competition. So here's just a way to start thinking about things, which is what percentage of visitors to your site do you satisfy? This is actually not horrible, by the way, if you did 60%. It's really pretty good in the grand scheme of things. But here's just another way to look at it. If you think about, the way you've built out pages on your site, you have a top level page, category page, a bunch of second level pages, more third level pages, and even more long tail pages, right? And you start mapping, and this is, by the way, just a guess on my part, but it's meant to illustrate, maybe your top level page satisfies 11% of your users. And then your second level pages might satisfy another quarter, roughly. And then the third level page is 18, and your long tail page is 15. If I don't address this chunk down here, that's 33% of the users I had the opportunity to satisfy that I passed on. And you probably don't want to do that. So there's a related concept here, which is as you start thinking about this idea of user journeys to your site and the fact that Google wants to see that you've mapped those out really well, right? You've got to stop thinking about page at a time SEO, right? Your ability to satisfy all user queries related to whatever topic they're on is going to be inherently dependent on a quantity of different pages that work together in order to address a broad array of the user's needs. And that's just critical to success here. So, I mean, just, the users want what they want, basically, right? So satisfying users, start thinking about it as a multi-page journey. Google does. So just understand that. So just a quick illustration here, and then I'll be wrapped up. Diabetes, it's a complicated topic. And WebMD just has ridiculously good rankings on this topic. They have 397 pages on it. And if you look at this in detail, a large percentage of those pages, like over 100, have nearly no search volume associated with what you see in the title tag. Sub 100 a month. And so here's just a quick case study from SEO Clarity to illustrate a related concept around using AI to address one piece of this. And that is, and other vendors have this too, Search Metrics, Bright Edge, they all have different ways of getting at this. But they did an analysis of a page and then the pages it was competing with on its key search results to see if there were content gaps. This was an NLP-based analysis, and a number of keywords were identified as missing, long-tail keywords in particular, and those pieces of content were added to the page to help address those specific user needs. And then, traffic went up 380%. So sounds like a good result. I'll take it. So, and then a quick study from a site called QMath, approaching this from a different way. This is their growth. They're like nothing in the beginning of 2020. They start hitting the gas pedal towards the end of 2020. They went basically from 0 to 48 million visitors in a year. And the way they did that is they pushed out a massive library of content on the topic of math. You see here that they managed to publish over 20,000 pages in 1 year. I'm not suggesting you all do that, thank you. But by the way, I have gone into a major brand before and told them they needed to publish 1,000 pages in the next year. They did it. It's currently 40% of the non-branded traffic to their site, and overall site traffic doubled. So just to give you an idea as to what can happen when you approach these kinds of things. But just to look at an example page, it's too bad this is as blurry as it is, and it's a little hard to tell, but it's just a detailed article in this case about a right triangle. And what's not emerging from this slide as it currently is here is they do a really good job of interlinking, and interlinking within pieces of content really helps people follow through those user journeys in a very, very effective way, so they can find what they need. So just some key characteristics of winning content to close here. Obviously you got to deliver value, got to be thorough with your topic coverage, high quality, accurate. We've covered all that. I didn't spend that much time on in-context interlinking, but don't overlook it. It's really important. Got to have the right team that can create that kind of content. And then two other things I didn't get into detail because it wasn't really about the user experience side of things. But once you've produced a ton of great content, tell the world about it and do a good job at it. So that's it. And I think we have a few minutes for questions. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take questions. I do ask that you use the microphone just because there are some virtual folks.
So in regards to what you were saying earlier about some of those cases where people put out a wealth of content and it really kind of benefited them, how do you think that speaks to kind of putting out more say like long form content as opposed to going out there and kind of doing more of a hub and spoke thing? Do you think that long form content still has that type of value since it's comprehensive, or do you think it's better to kind of break it up more?
So give me 1 second. I'm going to insert one parenthetical since we did talk about this. Don't spew crap content. It won't work. Okay. Just, wanted to get that out. Now back to your question. So in terms of long form content, it can. I think it's a matter of what's best for the content. In some cases, the hub and spoke model or the heavily interlinked nest model, if you will, is a far better experience. I actually don't think at the end of the day, with the way things have evolved, that either is a better answer than the other generally. I think it's more figure out what's best for the specific context of your site and your user. Okay. Sorry, it wasn't a simple answer. But
no, it's what I expected, to be honest.
I could have just been, an SEO and said it depends. Yeah. So
thanks.
There was a question up here, I think. You have one?
I think it was kind of similar. I was just going to ask if you've noticed any correlation to how long the blog is, but you're just saying as long as you're answering the question or like the query, then you're good to go. Yeah.
So for example, there's a nerd wallet page that ranks #1 for the query, how much house can I afford? Excuse me. And it has no content on it. It's a calculator. That's the page. And it ranks #1, and it's probably because it's supported with enough links to get Google comfortable that that content is actually there, even though, or rather the question is answered, even though there isn't text content there to back it up. So short pages can, in the right situation, do very, very well.
I think this is probably going to be our last question, but I know Eric will be around if you guys want to talk.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Back on your entity relationships page with Elon Musk, it kind of was implied that they only go one way.
It's both ways.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't mean to, it was a little difficult to get all the text on the slide, and it was getting a little messy, and yeah, but it's absolutely two-way.
A quick one. We have maybe one more question if there is.
So I know we have like tools that give us PageRank scores. Is there a tool that you've heard of that gives like an EAT score?
I'll give you one.
Hey, Tony, we could go make a lot of money and build one of those.
I throw darts and.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. Not at this point. Actually, what I didn't include in here, just the last lot before we wrap it, is, and I will be happy to stand out in the hall and talk to anybody who wants to come out, but at one point, Danny Sullivan stated publicly in a tweet that while they don't treat EAT as a ranking factor, they look at a lot of other signals that are a proxy for that. So just to unravel that one little bit is, when Google puts a term out there, like EAT, to them, they're defined it like an engineer, and it's like a component that's required to hold up the bridge over the Potomac River, and it's that exact component, and anything that's like 95% similar to that, no, that's something completely different to them. So what I mean is they define terms with great precision. But what we as individuals who might colloquially decide that having an authoritative author is good EAT, we as people in the industry, we call that EAT. And for all intents and purposes, it's perfectly fine. Just know that you're using the term differently than Google does, where they mean something very specific. But Google is looking at things that approximate EAT, such as putting a good author name on the page.
Everybody else, thank Eric for coming out and giving us